have been married to my husband for 2 years. He has a habit of sitting in the car 5 to 10 minutes before entering the house. I don't know why he does it, but he talked about a past traumatic experience he had when he came home and caught his ex cheating on him. Because of that, he'd just spend few minutes in his car before he enters his home as response to his trauma. Now, I won't say that he's wrong in coping with what happened, but this has made me feel uneasy, and it had caused many fights between us. Like when we have guests, he'd sit outside before coming in, or when dinner is waiting on him, and he'd take 10 minutes silently sitting in the car. I was worried that something might come up and he does not respond properly. And it happened last week. My 8 years old son tripped and fell from the stairs and broke his ankle. He was in so much pain, and I called my husband to come take him to the hospital, and he rushed out of work, but then I called, and then I was stunned when I looked out the window and I saw him sitting outside the house in his car. I was both shocked and angry. I ran outside and I asked how long he was sitting in the car. He told me around 8 minutes. I asked why he didn't come into the house immediately to help, and he said he would after 2 more minutes. I was so mad and hurt, but tried to rush him, and he insisted he wouldn't feel comfortable coming in until the 10 minutes were up. He told me to get my son ready to take him to the hospital, but I started screaming at him nonstop, telling him this was a family emergency and that he was out of his mind to behave like that. It might not have been my best response, but I was shocked by his behavior and quite concerned because I had this situation always stuck in the back of mind, thinking what my husband do when there's a family emergency. I ended up taking my son by myself when my neighbor intervened and offered to take us. We went to the hospital, and later my husband came and tried to talk to me, but I refused. I then went to stay with my mom and texted him that I wanted a divorce. He tried to rationalize and justify what he's done, saying he could not help it and that he was nervous and wanted to help my son but felt stuck. I refused to reply to his messages, and days later his family literally harassed me, saying I was making my husband's trauma more severe and that I disrespected his boundaries by pushing him off his limits. I feel lost and unable to think because of the whole ordeal. My family are with me on this, but they can be biased sometimes. My husband is still trying to basically talk me out of divorce, saying I'm making a huge deal out of it. I feel like I no longer have trust in him, especially when it comes to serious stuff like how cold he acted in a family emergency. Edit to clarify that my son isn't his biological son. We don't have kids together.
Comment 1. If he can't get past this when someone is having an emergency, it's seriously impacting his life and needs to see a mental health professional. I understand your frustration, concern, and how this is in a sense a very serious straw that broke the camel's back. If I was in your situation, I would consider divorce only if he refuses to get help. You've been more than understanding when it's stuff that's not as big of a deal like dinner being ready, but in medical emergencies, he needs to be able to either work through his discomfort or be okay with being uncomfortable. It's not acceptable or fair to you or your family to put someone else at risk because he would feel uncomfortable walking into the house. Comment 2. NTA, but this is more than just a choice he made. This sounds like an obsessive compulsion. The fact that he has to wait exactly 10 minutes each time sounds like he has created a permanent superstition in himself. On a deep level, he believes that if he comes in after 5 minutes, you will have to cheat on him or something else terrible will happen. You need to get him into therapy with someone who can help him rewire this pathway, and possibly look into why it was formed in the first place. Comment 3. I'm just picturing him collapsed on the floor having a heart attack, and she calmly looks at her watch and says she needs to wait 10 minutes because she was traumatized by him not helping their son in an emergency. He clearly needs professional help, and if it was me, I'd make it a condition of continuing the relationship. NTA. My 30M youngest sister, 14F, came to my workplace to tell me that she was pregnant. I was upset when I heard it because she's so young, and the baby daddy had already ditched her. Her environment isn't also good for any child to be living in. We were basically arguing from the very start before my wife, 26F, and son, 1M, arrived. She was confused as to why my sister was here but didn't intervene and told me she could wait for me to talk to my sister, so I did. I suggested my sister to get an abortion because she can't even take care of herself. She sure as hell can't take care of a baby, but she refused. I don't want to force her, so I suggested adoption, and she still refused, which annoyed me. I then asked her how she'd care for the baby. She said she'd get a job. I explained that she won't get any legal job at 14, that's child labor, and part-time jobs won't pay enough anyway. I asked her again, but all her responses were that she'd figure it out. We kept going back and forth. I didn't know how to make her realize the situation, so I tried to tell her that it wasn't fair for an innocent child to live with its drunk grandparents and its mom struggling. She was quiet after that, then blurted out that I could house her and the baby since I have a nice house. I didn't straight up refuse her, but I knew I didn't want to take her in either. So, I asked her about other expenses. She said again that she'd figure it out later, and that was when I knew she wanted a handout and to depend on me again. So, I told her no, I wouldn't take her in. I said she had 3 options: 1. Abort it, 2. Adopt it out, or 3. Keep it but raise it yourself. I also said if she wants to keep it, I can help with some necessities here and there, but I won't raise her baby. She seemed to turn deaf to this part, became defensive, and yelled at me with things like, "You're my brother, you're supposed to help me, or are you gonna leave me and the baby to fend for ourselves? You're heartless." That was when my wife decided to intervene because it had gotten out of hand. My sister seemed to aim her anger at my wife and said, "Mind your own business, you don't even have a job, and he provides for you and your son." And she wasn't done yet. She kept guilt-tripping me, and when I didn't respond, she went back to disrespecting me and my wife. It wasn't until she said something about my wife that made me snap with something more hurtful, which made her cry and stomp out. Comment 1. My cousin had a baby at 14, her parents kind of like yours let her be and felt that's what happens. She stayed home and raised the baby and inevitably married another man at 17 and had a second kid before 18. Thankfully that man was an angel and dealt with her for 10 years, mostly for the 2 kids. She is now 44, her daughter 30 and her daughter went through hell. She's in a good place, no thanks to her mother but actually her stepfather. I feel like my cousin is still that 14-year-old girl, especially her FB posts. She never grew up and that is so sad to me. All this to say, remove yourself from the situation. She thinks she's an adult and you can't change her mind, I've seen it firsthand. However, if you get any thought your soon-to-be niece/nephew could be in danger, call CPS. NTA. Comment 2. What a messed up and difficult situation. Sorry you are dealing with it. You are under no obligation to house or otherwise provide for a child that isn't your own. Otherwise, there would be no homeless or starving children in the world. That includes your sister and her baby. Anyone who tells you something different should only do so after offering to take her in themselves, or they really don't have a leg to stand on. It is unfortunate that she seems to have made a childish decision, which led to conception, but keeping the child is a very adult decision. As she is making it, she has to become an adult real quick. That includes figuring out where she is going to live with her baby. All you have done is told her one place she can't live. NTA. You would also be a fool to think that her treatment of your wife will improve if she moves in. For my whole life, I, 30F, have had a lot of anxiety when it comes to driving. It has never been too much of a problem, as I live in a city and I can walk wherever I need to go. I have been married to my husband, Stan, 32M, for 3 years, together for 6. Throughout our relationship, he has tried to help me learn how to drive. The problem is, Stan is not a very good teacher. AMD gets very impatient and angry every time we try. We go to the parking lot of an abandoned warehouse sometimes, it's huge. Anyway, if I make one small mistake, for example, if I don't check my mirrors for a long enough time, Stan yells at me. I will already be nervous at the wheel, but with all the yelling, it would cause me to break down and cry. I have a brother, Paul, 33M, who I hang out with typically once a week. A few months ago, I was talking to Paul about how I want to learn how to drive, but I'm very nervous about it. He offered to help teach me when we hang out. Paul's husband, Chris, also was willing to help me out, and they actually made me feel so much more at ease behind the wheel. I thought I was bad at driving, but it turns out, I was just anxious. Another factor that made me want to learn, besides feeling like I need to do this, is that Stan has told me that he won't have a child with me until I get my license, which I definitely understand. 2 weeks ago, on my day off from work, Paul and Chris took me to the DMV and I finally got my license. I also bought a used car a few days ago from money that I've been saving up for years. I'm so happy, and I have has the support from my brother and his husband. I thought Stan would be mad that I did all of this behind his back. And he was somewhat disappointed that I didn't want his help. I love him so much, but honestly he wasn't the right teacher for me. Anyway, on Sunday, Stan and I both had off from work and he told me he had a surprise for me. He took me to his parents' house, where they had a celebration for me, basically like a little party congratulating me because I learned how to drive. Halfway through, my mother-in-law was giving a speech about how proud she was of me, but also proud of my husband, for all of THR support and lessons he was giving me. I could feel the anger rising in my chest. Stan had been telling everyone that he was the one who has been teaching me to drive. I snapped and told everyone, basically, that the few times Stan tried to teach me, I always ended up crying because he would yell at me until he was blue in the face. That the only people who helped me and gave me confidence were Paul and Chris. And that, if anything, Stan made things worse for me. Which was true. But now, Stan won't talk to me. My mother-in-law, father-in-law and sister-in-law are on my side, but my 2 brother-in-laws and a couple of cousins are on Stan's side. I kind of do feel like an R. But at the same time, everything I said was true. Comment 1, NTA. Please don't have a child with this person. Anyone who puts conditions on having a child with you, i.e. not until you get your license, doesn't see you as a life partner, they see you as a brood mare. Don't get stuck with a baby from this joker, he will eventually bail on you and you will be a single parent. At the very least, get counseling. Preferably with Stan, who sounds like he would be an absolute shat as a parent if he doesn't have any more patience than that. Comment 2. Take that driver's license and your new car and use it to drive away from him. He cannot regulate his emotions, he lies to his family about his actions, he yells at someone who is learning and extremely nervous for not knowing exactly what to do. This is not someone to have babies with. Is he going to yell at them because they can't communicate the way he wants? Will he throw a bigger tantrum than your toddler? Is he going to be a decent active parent? Or are you supposed to do it all as a grown woman who should do it? NTA. Comment 3. NTA. I can see how you might feel like you were, but truly, you are not. You spoke the truth. You did so in a reasonable way. While the truth can hurt, merely saying the truth is not an asshole thing to do. Stan is the R here who was not respecting you when teaching you to drive and was an even bigger R when taking credit for it. I, 26F, have been married to my husband, 29M, for 2 years and we have a 9-month-old son. My friend Amy, 27F, is normally a very fun friend, but recently I had been noticing that when she asks me to do something and I tell her I need to double check with my husband, she gets annoyed. I admittedly never really used to do this, but since I had a baby it makes more sense to do, because if my husband was already making plans, it's not like we can just do our own separate things anymore. We have a baby to think of and need to plan to find someone to babysit if we'll both be out. This past weekend I went to the movies with Amy, and after it was over she suggested we go get dinner. This wasn't originally the plan, so I said yes, sounds good. Let me call husband really quick, and before I could even finish my sentence she literally stomped off and shouted forget it. I was literally so confused, and she had drove me there, so I then had to call my husband to come get me, and he had to wake up our baby to do so. The next day Amy texted me a bunch of loaned texts and basically said that it's creepy that I have to let my husband know my every move, and that it's rude to her for me to do that because when we make plans together my husband isn't invited, so he doesn't need to weigh in. I tried to tell her that I literally just needed to let him know where I was so he didn't worry, but she kept repeating herself and then also insinuated my husband is abusive. First off, I would put the hurt on him if he ever tried to abuse me, and second, I don't think that's abusive to ask your partner to let you know their whereabouts. Like I'm a mother, I can't just disappear. And he also would never tell me no, I can't go somewhere, like he actively tells me to go out with friends, but if I don't come home when I say I will, then I should at least call to let him know so he don't think I'm dead in a ditch. I told Amy this and she was not having it. Also, for context, Amy has only ever been in one exclusive relationship when we were in school. They broke up before graduation and never lived together. So maybe that's part of it, but she really seems to believe I'm being controlled and that I should just do my thing and not check in with my husband. My mom said from now on probably just don't tell her I'm checking in with him, but still do it in text, but my husband said she's the disrespectful one and that I could do better than her as a friend. So, Comment 1. NTA. Amy is really over-dramatizing this situation. If you have a child, you have to make sure whoever's watching them is available to watch them for a longer time than planned. Perhaps her paucity of relationship experience is leading her to think communication is the same as control, but either way, her concern that your husband is abusing you is way out of line. Comment 2. NTA. The whole reason I'm still single and childless at 40 is because I like to do what I want, when I want, and not have to check in with anyone. Partners not so much, other than a text to say, hey, I'm gonna be late, but children mean responsibility, and making sure that babysitters, etc. are all lined up. I've certainly never bitten a friend's head off because they've checked in that their children are covered if something last minute happens. In fact, I expect it. Not sure why Amy has such a chip on her shoulder. Think she needs to grow up some more. Comment 3. NTA. Assuming your husband also calls you when out with friends if he is staying late or changing locations. There are bad relationships where it is only one person who is expected to be tracked and the other can come and go places as they like. Your friend may possibly think you are in that situation, in which case a talk could help. But if it is an issue with her just not wanting to be reminded that you have other attachments than her, then the talk is less likely to help.